Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. An indulgent yogi, a mango maniac, a beach bum, and an offbeat poet. No, it's not an opener to a joke. It's an opener to the question, what do they have in common? Well, they're all less public facets of today's guest: somatic psychologist, biodynamic craniosacral therapist, contemplative neuroscience teacher, and Tibetan medicine student Michael J. Shea, PhD, who is widely regarded as one of the preeminent educators and authors in the fields of somatic psychology, myofascial release, and cranial sacral therapy. With a master's degree in Buddhist Psychology, a doctorate in Somatic Psychology, and 10 years apprenticeship with a shaman on the Navajo reservation as part of his doctoral internship, one might imagine that Michael Shea's 10 best list of most influential books might be a bit heavy going. Prepare to be surprised. Michael J. Shea, welcome.
Thank you, Sandie, for that introduction. I better be good enough for everything you said about me. Thank you.
I have to say, I've never laughed so much at somebody's keywords. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And you can tell us more about them later in the show.
Thank you.
For now, let's just start with, you say that it's impossible to count the number of books on spirituality that you've read and contemplated over the past 70 years, but your list follows the track of your spiritual maturation, the resolution of your atheism, and recovering a balance between your Catholic upbringing and Buddhist affiliation with the Dalai Lama. You also say that each title can be considered a contemplation in its own right without the need to buy the book. That's an interesting one. All we have to do is contemplate the titles of these. Well, wait till people hear some of those titles. So how difficult was it, or how easy, to distill your list down to just 10?
Well, it was fun, because I'm an academic, part-time academic. So putting together book lists is what I do. And my publisher once said, Michael, you don't need 300 references. I've done 10 or 15 books now. And so, but I put them together. It's just the training. But it was fun, Sandie, because I was able to track, where I've been since my early 20s. And that was helpful. It's always good at my age to have a life review, because that's what we do at the end of our lives. We start reviewing, and this was a good review and a lot of fun.
Well, I should have published your original document that you sent me. I can't remember how many pages long it was, but we have guests who always try to sneak in the odd book or 5 odd books. I think you must have mentioned upwards of 24 or more other books that you really enjoyed on your journey.
Right. Well, I think each of the 10 gave a sub field. Yes. Because it wasn't just, I had 3, how do I get it down to 1? Well, no, there's 5. So I wanted to include everything. So I think, thank you, Sandie, for editing it down. I also want to tell you how much I appreciate that.
Well, I hope I haven't spoilt anything. We will eventually publish the whole list in its entirety, but we can't do that just yet. So the first title, this may come as a surprise to some people: Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, A Savage Journey to the Heart of the American Dream by Hunter S. Thompson, published in 1971. When and what was it about this book?
Well, I was in the military service at the time, and it was at that moment where I parked my car next to a terrorist bomb. The bomb went off, killing people. I narrowly escaped death. I got a citation, for helping out in all of that. But I also had a very healthy case of PTSD that started at that moment. And consequently, my mind went kind of wild. And I didn't know that wildness until I was also at the same time exposed to psychedelics while I was in the service. And so this book really kind of put it together for me. Oh, I've had a wild experience. This book is describing the wild experience. And at the same time, it's telling me I've got to get away from culture. I've got to go inward. This is about going inward, whether it's with drugs or meditation. But this is what our culture needs right now. And I got the push. It was a bomb, but I got the push to go inward. This book was the first book that could describe my inner experience as I was going through it without therapy, without help, just psychedelics and going to work 9 to 5.
Wow. It wasn't the first book that you'd read that opened something up within you spiritually?
No, not particularly. No.
Interesting. Book number 2, Medical Nemesis, The Expropriation of Health by Ivan Illich. A book you found very disturbing when you first read it in 1976. Why did it disturb you?
Well, I was supposed to be going to law school when I got out of the military, and I was a military officer and all that. And it was a beautiful experience, except for the bombing attack. And I couldn't go back to law school, and I ended up going to massage school. I mean, I did what I call a U-turn into my future. And by doing that, I had to learn about my body, because when I came out of the service, I was morbidly obese. I was overeating, over drinking, overdoing psychedelics, and I knew I needed help. And so this book shifted me into understanding the nature of health, and that I had to take control and responsibility. I wasn't going to get the help I needed from mainstream medicine. And we see that now with a lot of people. It's the drugs, the medicines aren't working. In general, they do for some people. But for me, this book was an eye-opener when you've got 75 to 100,000 people a year in the United States that are dying from mistakes that are made in hospitals, big pharma, and in medical systems in general. It's like, oh, I have to take responsibility for me. This was another wake-up call.
What made you interested in massage?
Oh, God. That gets to the 10th book on the list, Sandie. But
okay. Don't give it away.
well, I could give it away now, just a little bit.
No,
okay.
No, don't give it away. We'll save that one.
Okay.
Save that one
it's the 9th book on the list, so we'll wait till the 9th book to answer that question.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I know you said that book was such an indictment of Western medicine. And what has changed since then? Not a lot.
No, not a lot at all. And the statistics, actually, it's looking worse and worse in terms of all across the board, the psychological disorders and so forth. And now obesity and all the metabolic disorders that I'm writing about. So,
yeah, I mean, you've said that, what was the percentage? 85, 90% of Americans have a metabolic dysregulation, and 80% of Britons.
9 out of every 10 Americans has a metabolic disruption and unhealthiness. There's massive treatment that's needed, and it's the type of treatment that's happening is not working that well.
Okay, well, we'll talk some more about that, because this is really important things that people need to hear.
Right.
So book number 3, this one comes up so often. Autobiography of the Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, published in 1946. What can one say about it that hasn't already been said? Right.
Well, I was trying to think of an anecdote, like this morning I went, why did I read that? No, what did I remember from that? And the remembering was that, during massage school, I read the Medical Nemesis, but I also read this one because that's what was happening in massage schools in the 70s. People were, spreading and sharing all the books that they're reading on spirituality and so forth. I only remember one passage from the book, Sandie, and that was him describing in the ancient times a yogi that they found sitting under a tree meditating for so many years that the roots of the tree had grown around him. And that created an image for me in that book. Oh, I want to learn how to meditate. And I want to learn how to be able to sit still like that, because it's very difficult for me to sit still, even though I claim to be a meditator. So it was that image from that book that helped the most.
Sounds pretty creepy to me.
Well, it is creepy when you sit down and meditate and you have to look at your mind and you realize your mind is pretty creepy sometimes in terms of what's going on up here or wherever it's happening.
Yeah. So book number 4 is Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. 1973.
Right. Yeah, that was on the reading list, because we had like hundreds of books on the reading list at Naropa University, regarding spirituality and so forth. But one of the focuses in getting a degree in Buddhist psychology is to what degree are you using spirituality as an avoidance for your emotional needs or your wrecked life that you're avoiding. And so spiritual materialism is a term referring to that, to make sure that the spiritual practice you're doing, it has a lot of other things in it as well, but to make sure that the spiritual practice you're doing is not a practice of avoidance, or what they call the spiritual bypass. That was the term at the time. You're using your spiritual practice to bypass the life that you need to fix on your own or with help. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, that phrase spiritual bypass is being used quite a lot now, again, and I think it's very true. There's that temptation to always, try to be the spiritual soul and rise above things and not look at anything negative.
Well, I think, Sandie, it's also important to say that avoidance is important from time to time. Our lives are so full and they can be so overwhelming. I'm okay with avoiding my life for a short term because I know what I'm doing. I would say, I will manage this later. Not maybe. I will manage this later. I think it's important that we acknowledge our avoidance and that we have a time frame for when we can start working on those pieces and not make it a bad thing. Avoidance is not a bad thing unless you want to kick the can all the way down to your end of your life and you've missed out.
What about, though, when I first came to America in 1999, the British aren't that religious, so it doesn't really figure much. But in America, religion is very important to many, many people. And I was producing a spiritual online magazine, and I found a lot of people came to that magazine and wanted to be in touch with what we were doing. They had left their church for one reason or another, and they thought that spirituality was going to solve all their problems, which surprised me because I couldn't work out what it was they thought they were going to get out of spirituality that was going to solve all their problems. But it seemed to be quite a thing, and I didn't understand it.
It's called hope. Religions and spirituality in general give you, or they actually attempt to promise you some sense of hope that the suffering in your own particular style of suffering that you're having or enjoying or not enjoying at the moment can be finished or can get over with. So it's hope. In Buddhism, they say hope is hopeless. Give up the hope. There is no hope. It's getting down to the basics. What is it underneath that can bring meaning and make sense of our own life?
Yeah. Book number 5. The Wisdom of No Escape.
Pema.
Perfect. Next one to come up. How to Love Yourself and the World by Pema Chodron, published in 1991.
Yeah, The Wisdom of No Escape, I think, was the first one. I'm not sure when. She's done so many. The point with The Wisdom of No Escape is when I converted to Buddhism, from atheism to Buddhism, and that was quite a leap. And now I've kind of made a leap backwards, but into balancing Catholicism and Buddhism. But there's a path when you convert to Buddhism. First is refuge vow. It's a ceremony where you marry yourself and you vow to really get to know yourself, to go inward, to get to know yourself and start developing clarity and awareness about who you are and where you're going in life. The second vow is more of a connection to a spiritual teacher, and it's called Bodhisattva vow. So Bodhisattva meaning compassion. And I wanted to do that ceremony exclusively because Pema Chodron was giving the empowerment of what's called Lojong, or it's called actually Tonglen practice within the Lojong series of mind trainings. It's compassion practice. So before Pema was Pema, I actually had the empowerment of the compassion practice called Tonglen from her in that Bodhisattva vow somewhere in 1981. And it's in this book, The Wisdom of No Escape, where she's an expert on compassion and really an amazing human being. And this practice called Tonglen, Tonglen. But it's about compassion. And so that's where I got an empowerment, a deeper empowerment on compassion.
So compassion, I think that's something that many of us strive to cultivate and find it rather difficult. Why do you think that is?
Well, you're right. It's a difficult thing because we typically misunderstand compassion, thinking that we have to be codependent, we have to give up caring for ourselves and only take care of the other person. That's not the way it works. In the Buddhist tradition, you have got to relate to how you're suffering. You've got to relate to how your mind gets you into problems, how your emotions get you into these problems, and so forth. And with that level of awareness, you have to give birth to compassion for yourself first. And once you have compassion for yourself, you gradually realize everybody's in the same boat. Everybody has their own style of suffering. And I'm doing me, you're doing you, everybody's doing their own style. But that's what compassion is that understanding that we are all suffering. I've got to work on it myself, and I've got to do my best to try to get out of somebody else's way in terms of how they're going to heal themselves. It's more compassionate to stay out of the way of someone's healing process than it is to engage it, interfere with it, and so forth. I had a lot of training in that. It doesn't work.
That's interesting. I've got more to say about that later. Book number 6, Living from the Heart, Heart Rhythm Meditation for Energy, Clarity, Peace, Joy, and Inner Power by Puran Bear.
Yep. Yeah.
1998.
Yeah. Beautiful. I sat at the feet of Pir Vilayat Khan, who was his teacher back when I was in massage school. And I didn't know anything about these heavy hitters that were coming in. It could have been the Buddha himself. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, give me a beer or whatever. But the Sufi tradition is about the heart. And what I learned from this book is that the science of empathy, which is really what we have to get into before we can even get into compassion, is we have to understand what empathy is and how to feel into another person. And the way that we do that in terms of the science now is through what's called cardioception. All you have to do is be consciously aware of your heartbeat, and it will actually create an empathetic response for other people. This book is stunningly brilliant in terms of the practices that are given on how to contemplate your own heartbeat physically and its linkage to empathy and consequently the linkage to compassion.
So, and you do this, don't you? Because when you go to sleep, when you're going to sleep at night, you are reciting things with your heartbeat.
Right. I do a lot of pieces with my heart, and that's what I teach in the work that I teach. That's the first step. If you're going to be in relationship with another human being, you need to feel your heartbeat. And you need to, the breath and so forth, but you need to feel your heartbeat. And that's what starts to ignite empathy for self and other.
We'll say more about that, because, the thought of just sitting there and trying to focus on my heart. I've got monkey mind. I find it so hard to meditate. It just feels like I couldn't possibly do that for more than a minute.
Hey, a minute's fine. I mean, everybody has monkey mind. Everybody thinks that by sitting and doing any kind of meditation, Buddhist meditation or whatever, that the mind is going to shut off. Sorry, the mind is not shut off. It can fade to the background, and it depends on your object of concentration. But one of those objects of concentration can be your heartbeat. It doesn't mean you have to stay with it, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. When you notice your mind has taken over, you notice and you come back. That's called mindfulness. You just come back to the object of concentration, whether it's your heartbeat, your breath, awareness, space. There's any number of objects of concentration that help settle the mind.
How do you teach that? How do you teach people to listen to their heartbeat? I mean, do you do it in seminars?
Oh, yes. That's all I do. I mean, if you take a seminar with me, and I teach the biodynamic cardiovascular therapy, that's the first step, is, working with your posture and your breath, but also feeling your heartbeat. Because if I have my hands on someone and I'm trying to sense their pulse, which I do, and then the quality of the blood flow and so forth, the actual pulse rate is an indicator of empathy, and it allows empathy and settling and safety to occur in the therapeutic relationship. There's just no healing without a sense of safety within the therapeutic relationship. And feeling the heartbeat, coming back to that periodically in the relationship is the gold mine. That's all I teach as the basic practice in every class.
I wouldn't mind attending that class. Book number 7. Osteopathic Odyssey by James Jealous, D.O., published in 2015. And he was your mentor, wasn't he?
Yeah, good old Jim. Jim passed away a couple of years ago, but when I was doing my doctoral work, I really had heard about him, and I'd already been involved with the Upledger style of craniosacral therapy. And I'd heard there was something else. I was just getting bored with what I was teaching. And so I contacted him, and he agreed to mentor me. He only works with osteopaths, but since I was working on a doctorate, and my brother is also an osteopath, he agreed to mentor me. And it was a beautiful relationship because he mentored me in the study of human development and human embryology. And I graduated when he realized that I had fallen in love with myself, meaning that I had encountered my embryo. I'd encountered my originality. And Jim turns out to be a mystic. And he really introduced me to the mystical side of manual therapy, what they call laying on of hands, or spiritus passe, which is what I'm really involved in right now. How do you bring the spirit into your hands? He was the one that helped facilitate that at a spiritual level. And I'm forever grateful. That's all I can say. He was a brilliant human being.
Book number 8, Japanese death poems written by Zen monks and haiku poets on the verge of death, compiled by Joel Hoffman, published in 1985.
Well, there's a pregnant pause right there, huh, Sandie? It's like, oh my God, the death subject. Everybody's afraid of death. It's a difficult subject to bring up. Next year, I've been asked to teach a course on death ignition in Europe, and I'm actually in the beginning stages of really working with that. And so for me, this process helped me, and it continues to help me overcome my rock bottom fear and terror of my own death that I have. and that it surfaces periodically. And then I get very laissez-faire. It's like, oh, I'll die in my sleep and it'll be okay. It's like, no. So this book is a very interesting book written by, as the title suggests, these Zen masters at the time of death. And I began to memorize these pieces. And they're very helpful because at the same time, Sandie, in my life, I was being asked to conduct funeral masses. And I was thinking this morning that the first funeral mass I was ever asked to conduct was from a bank robber. His mother was my roommate for a number of years when I was in massage school. And I never knew this about her son. And one day she called me and she said, my son has been killed. And can you take me to the nursing home or to the mortuary? And I didn't know he was a bank robber and he got shot and killed in a bank holdup. And then she said, I found a church that's willing to have a service for him. Would you lead the service? And I'm thinking, how do you lead a service for a bank robber that's been killed in the act of bank robbing? And it was really about his mother and the surviving family members, that no matter how bad our culture paints a particular person, they had a mother, they had a father, they have family. They did have love in their life at some point. And that's really the focus in terms of grieving and loss, because I do a lot of work with grief and loss now. So it's really about overcoming the fear, very much so, but also feeling the love of family in knowing that this has to be a loving act, that death can also be a loving act.
Death seems to be, as a topic, enjoying a renaissance.
It sure is.
I'm seeing so many books on death and dying and grief and all, everything around it. You said that you are at times very afraid of your own death. Are you afraid of the dying process, or are you afraid of not existing anymore?
I think it's the fear of not existing anymore. And then my thought is, at what point of not existing anymore will I no longer remember Michael? I'll no longer remember my ego structure or whatever. And it's like, and I'll completely forget about that. And it's like, no, I don't want to forget about me, Michael. So
I can resonate with that. I mean, you can contemplate death and many aspects of it, but that thought of, but there may come a point at which I know nothing.
Well, I think we also you have to understand the literature. There's new literature coming out. The dying process, if it goes on a natural way, can be very, very beatific. You read about these divine states, and it turns out that the brain keeps working, and biophotons and light is generated by the brain, and it allows access to moving towards that classical going towards the light dynamic, which also has an edge of euphoria to it as well. Apparently about 20% of deaths can be euphoric. And when I did my chaplaincy training at Upaya Institute, we had to do a lot of reading on death and dying, because that's part of the training to be a chaplain, is working with death and dying. And it was always about dealing with people's regrets, the regrets that they had, and that the pain that they were experiencing in the moment. And I want to lead my life now without any regrets, so that if I have a natural death, we'll see what happens. And I'll deal with my fear as it comes up, hopefully.
Do you think that one can, I had a wonderful, beautiful friend, and last year we were having a conversation, and we both agreed that, when it came to our departure, we didn't want any prolonged, pain or anything. We just said, we're going to say, okay, up and out.
Right.
2 weeks later, he did exactly that.
Wow.
He just, boom.
Right.
Nobody was expecting it. Everything was fine. And he was up and out.
Well,
that's amazing.
It is amazing. And I think the other contemplation around this that's important is that people get clear on their wishes in terms of heroic measures. My mother, for 10 years before she died, was on a respirator and a feeding tube for 10 years. And so I've got all the paperwork, and my wife has all the paperwork. We want none of that. I just want to be able to stop eating and go. I don't want to be force fed or anything like that.
Yeah.
No heroic measures.
Yeah. It really is time to for us all to be very, very open about death.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so.
So we're going to take a short break now. You're listening to a No BS Spiritual Book Club interview, and sharing the 10 books that had the biggest influence on his life journey is one of the preeminent educators and authors in the fields of somatic psychology, myofascial release, and cranial sacral therapy, Michael J. Shea. We'll be back with more from Michael after this break.
Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit Sedgbeer.com, click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's Sedgbeer.com, SEDGBEER.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene keys is basically the code book of life. In the gene keys, the book is made up of these 3 levels: shadows, gifts, and siddhis. And the journey is through those 3 levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the siddhi. And the siddhis are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Michael Shea, Book 9, has been described as America's most honest memoir. It is Sex by Design, the Betty Dodson story, published in 2016. Tell us about your journey with this book and with Betty Dodson.
it's more of my journey with Betty. So we're going from death to sex. That's quite a leap, but
What else is there?
What else is there? It's true. So I think earlier in the show, we talked about how I got involved with massage therapy and so forth. And I had mentioned when I got out of the military, I was morbidly obese. And my sister was the business partner of Betty Dotson at the time in the 70s in New York City. Betty she was a classically trained fine artist. She studied in Paris, the most incredible paintings, classical style, Renaissance style paintings, amazing artist. And she got involved in sexuality and basically got involved in teaching women who were pre-orgasmic to have orgasm. And my sister was her business partner as they were setting up this series of workshops. I land on their doorstep and I'm out of my mind with PTSD. I'm out of the military finally, and I'm there. They were working and living in a raw food commune, and they kind of got tired of me just hanging out. And they said, "Look, you're going to have to earn some money, or you're going to have to do something in exchange. Would you like us to teach you how to do a massage, and then you will massage each of us every week, and that's in exchange for the rent?" I said, "Perfect." So they taught me a massage routine that was non-sexual, and I massaged each of them. And by the third week, Betty said, "Hey, you're really good at this. Would you like to earn some money? I can refer people to you." She had a spare room on 30th and Madison, and the window overlooked the Empire State Building. And on the wall, it had this great big scene of an orgy, a Roman orgy. And it was just awesome. And that's where I started my massage career, doing massage therapy with her friends and so forth in that community. And then I knew I needed professional training and to get a license. And that's when I went down to Miami and did the training down there. But Betty became a lifelong friend. Whenever I was in the city, whenever I could visit, I would always visit her and always do body work on her because she always needed body work. And she was also very explicit about sexuality. She was a very prolific writer herself. This is just her memoir, but she's got other books out that she published. And she was just a lifelong mentor about the nature of feminine, the sexual, the notion of pleasure, the notion of non-hurtful sexuality that doesn't create pain and suffering. A great mentor. I can't thank her enough for inviting me to understand my body as a body of pleasure, and to not diminish my sexuality and to not use it to harm other people. So I'm forever grateful to Betty.
Mm. And what will I learn from that book?
She was a pistol. She had to confront, from the moment she was a child, she had to confront abusers, people trying to take advantage of her. And she threatened to kill someone that tried to rape her when she was like an adolescent, and managed to, it was stunning how strong a woman she was. And so the book is inspirational about that. It's also inspirational about her relationship with the women's movement at the time, Betty Friedman, and so forth, and her role in the women's movement and her role in helping women recover their orgasm, which is just a remarkable, and her legend lives on in terms of her the legend that she left and the workshops that are ongoing around the world, helping women in this domain. So that's what you'll learn. Strong woman.
Book number 10.
Uh-oh.
Daily Afflictions, The Agony of Being Connected to Everything in the Universe, by Andrew Boyd, published in 2002.
Well, Sandie, as you know, and I don't know how many you have, but we have about 10 daily readers in our house, and we've probably given away another 20 or 30. The daily reader phenomenon, especially in the bathroom, is a big deal. I don't like reading in the bathroom, really. I'm in there for one or two things, or three if I'm going to take a shower. But some people really like these daily readers. This was the first daily reader that really challenged me not only from a philosophical point of view, but from a humorous point of view. Such headings as "Embrace Your Inner Corpse." The other one was "The Healing Power of Dysfunctional Families." And it turns out that the psychological literature not too long ago said that the people that come from dysfunctional families actually have a psychological head up on and many other people in culture and society. But he was one of the first ones to really take a look at the daily reader thing and poke fun at it. And it's a great book of philosophy and a great book of humor. Again, with that whole idea of turning inward and really self-discovery from the path of inwardness.
Sometimes when we finish talking about our guests' books, I will ask them a question like, who would you most like to have dinner with? Or, which one of these books would you give to a young person just starting out in life? I don't know which one to ask you. Maybe which book would you give to a young person just starting out in life?
Sex by Design. I think understanding sexuality and getting it from a sex educator, that's the one I would recommend, so that people get to know their body. Betty's message was that we also have a body of pleasure, and we have to be careful about levels of denial that come through spiritual traditions and religions and St. Augustine and those types of things that we know about. And my wife and I always give books on sexuality to our nieces and nephews as they graduate from high school, and so forth. So that's the one I would recommend, really.
This is a topic that is fascinating, and we seem to be going backwards when it comes to, sexuality and its role in the world, in our lives, etc., which should be just, it's part of life. But certainly in England, we're having a lot of issues with toxic masculinity, young men who are following people like Andrew Tate, misogynistic, who are, very much engaged in scoring and using young women, etc. And I sometimes wonder, why do we go through these, we went through this great opening up from the 60s onwards, and now we seem to be going backwards again. And there seems to be a hold on this toxic masculinity.
Well, I think everything comes in cycles. That whole thing that came out with Osho and all the sexual liberation, of which Betty was part of it. But when the AIDS thing happened and it meant sex liberation, a lot of people died from their liberal sexual attitudes and so forth. And that's very difficult. And in terms of toxic masculinity, again, I think a lot of this is so rooted in fear. And also the brainwashing from media. I wonder what these men, these toxic masculinity people, what their top 10 books would be, or what is influencing them to keep them going towards that level of toxicity. Mm-hmm. And I believe that ultimately we cycle out of that. I have no doubt that there was probably a time in my life where I was toxically masculine because I was in the military, and it was like, rah, rah, and the guns and blah, blah, blah. So I would hope that they would cycle out of that. I would assume they do. But at the same time, Sandie, there's a lot of trauma happening as a result of that. There's trauma happening to women, and the men are traumatizing themselves as well. And who's to blame for that? It's an inside job, number one, but it's also a cultural, social dynamic in terms of what are these people listening to on social media? What are the groups that they have formed that keep feeding them that level of toxicity? And sooner or later, they're going to run out of the testosterone that's driving it, and then they'll get a big surprise.
Yeah. You have published 7 books on spirituality and healing, and you've got a new one coming out next year, The Biodynamic Heart, Somatic Compassion Practices for a Clear and Vital Heart. Tell me what you mean by the phrase, a clear and vital heart. What does that mean to you?
Thank you for that. the editor wrote that. My subtitle was something about igniting compassion and mysticism to heal the world. And so a clear and vital heart, in the way I would describe it now, because that is what we're trying to teach, is that all this discussion we've had with some of these books in what I'm writing about is the marriage of body and spirit. In the Renaissance, there was a separation. The church was given spirit, the medical community was given body, and we see massive problems with that right now. So I think what's happening with my book is, and the books that I've been writing, is how do we bring spirit back in and take ownership of that? I'm of the belief right now that this is our only path, is the spiritual path. And to see the direction we're going and the ownership and autonomy of our body, is now called agency, is to take control of our body and to take control of our sexuality, to take control of our spiritual dynamic. And spirituality for me is really just the instinct for self-transcendence. You can call it soul, but within us is this instinct to get over our pain and to get over our suffering and to get over our toxicity. And to be able to wake that part of ourself up that's innate. And in order to do that, you have to be able to turn inside. You have to be able to turn inward. That's the contemplative path. That's the mystical path. And it just means turning inward and clearing your heart so that you can begin having, what is a spiritual heart? You can have a spiritual heart. It means you can have a clear heart that's not always drawn into strong emotions. That's basically what this means, or strong views about the way the world works, and that you can just be simply sensing your heart without a lot of thoughts, without a lot of interpretation, so that the natural innate compassion that we have, it's innate, it has to be ignited, it has to wake up. And through listening to the heartbeat, but clearing those strong emotions, clearing the obsessional thinking that we go through. And that's what a clear and vital heart means. And it's linked to the vagus nerve and our physiology and so forth. Absolutely, it all fits together.
In a previous interview you and I did on What Is Going On, you talked about spiritual suffering as being related to metabolic diseases. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Well, I think I would back into that from Tibetan medical point of view, and that is the problems we're having with our physical body now are metabolic problems. So we're down to the unseeable, unseen molecules in our body and to the damage that's being done to our genes by our diet, by our behaviors, and so forth. And I think it's very important to understand that there are practices, contemplative practices, especially visualization practices, where you visualize the spiritual body, the subtle body, and the interface that though the subtle body and visualization has with the molecules of your physical body. That's the interface where metabolism and molecules meets the subtle body of our spiritual body. So if we're working on our spiritual body, then we can kind of back into and have an effect on our metabolism at that level of linkage. So that's what I mean by that.
And healing is our only job, as you've said. Tell me about the vagus nerve, because we're hearing so much. All kinds of people are doing research on it now. There's a lot of misinformation out there. People are creating devices and exercises, to balance your vagus nerve, etc. Tell us the truth about this. What do we need to know?
Well, Sandie, they all work, but am I going to buy a $600 device that was first sold in Great Britain to have a vibration go into my ear here where the vagus nerve ends and to stimulate my vagus nerve when there's so many other ways to do that? Now, yes, if you have multiple sclerosis, which is that original research about vagal stimulators, then fine. There are certain diseases that can be very beneficial to stimulate your vagus nerve on a regular basis like that. And there is a lot of good information about the vagus nerve, but there's a lot of old information and that needs to be really updated. The vagus nerve is your main sensory supply of information from the center of your body up to your brain. Your vagus nerve, we're back to sexuality, but your vagus nerve conveys the molecule that regulates the orgasm reflex. It goes through the vagus nerve, it goes to your heart, where you can experience extreme states of pleasure and bliss, not just genitally. And then it goes to your brain, where you can have these incredible, insights and actually feel that your brain is full of pleasure. And so this dynamic is very, very important around the vagus nerve in general. So the vagus nerve also is giving all the information about the metabolism of the body and whether or not your metabolism is sick or whether it is healthy. And all of that is also going up to your heart and then your brain. So it's a massive information highway, and it has some fibers that if you stimulate, you can improve your metabolism and you can improve certain disease processes. And you can also learn a wide variety of exercises that are available out there on the internet. Just vagal stimulation are the devices. And you can, if you look at vagal stimulation, you'll also see another category of vagal stimulation with breathing, putting ice packs on your face, drinking ice water. There's all sorts of yoga practices, because your diaphragm, your respiratory diaphragm, is very tied in to your vagus nerve. And that's why yoga is so important in terms of just regulating your diaphragm and breathing as a way of regulating your vagus nerve, especially the exhalation. The longer you can exhale, the more tone you can bring to the vagus nerve and your body in general. And that means you have to slow down, and you've got to be able to sit and perhaps be in a contemplative practice and have long, slow exhalation. And that's affecting the vagus nerve. But some people want an electrical stim right away because they don't have time to breathe. So.
Yeah, we all want a shortcut, don't we? All these devices, just do it for me so that I don't have to do anything myself.
Right.
And it doesn't work that way. Is there, if somebody is really interested in pursuing this and, really looking at self-healing through many different avenues, including contemplation, what exercises, what things, could people do as a beginner?
Sandie,
am I asking a silly question?
Right. The book that's out now on the immune system, I'm trying to keep it simple. Going to a yoga class and going to learn a meditation. And I think these are all really, really important things. But the key component is what's going on inside in your viscera, in the core of your body. Your kitchen is the new emergency room. One of the main reasons people are sick is because they're eating junk, and they're getting food delivered through the window of their car, and the whole processed food and all of that goes on. So I say that the kitchen is the new ER. If you want to change your life, you need to change the way you're eating. People are going to keep eating what they want to eat, if it's processed food, and go to a yoga class and think that's the antidote. It's not. The spiritual practice is 24/7. It's every aspect of your life. It has to be examined. You have to look at it. And what's killing our body right now is what we're eating. And what's killing our mind and our hearts is what we're thinking and what we're looking at in terms of the media. And so the kitchen is the new emergency room, and the bathroom is the new intensive care unit. Begin to learn detoxification processes. So many people are constipated. That's my wife's business, and my sister's business is the colon hydrotherapy business. And so we have to learn that level of detoxification of how we get this toxicity out of our cells, out of our molecules, but how do we replace it with the good stuff? And especially with the microbiome and repairing the microbiome, because even the vagus nerve is wired into our microbiome. And if our microbiome is off, which it is in most people, then the brain is basically, we're going crazy, is what we're seeing in the culture.
Yeah, but how do you work on the microbiome? This is something that's interested me for a long time. But there are so many different kinds of probiotics that people say, "Oh, just take the probiotic." Somebody else, tells you to do something else. It's not like treating another part of the body. You can't see anything there.
The probiotics are really the first round. So somebody watching this is going to go out and go to a store and buy a probiotic. And I did that. I did that for many years. If you want to get to know your microbiome, then find a functional medicine doctor and have a stool test and have a comprehensive examination of your microbiome, especially if you're having psychological difficulties. Depression is now linked to an abnormal microbiome.
Yes.
Let's get a grip on this. Psychologically, is Prozac really helping? We don't have to answer that, but go to Trader Joe's, go to Whole Foods, go to your store and get some fermented food, get some sauerkraut. Start with fermented food, what I call the fartogenic foods, and start getting it rebuilt at that level. My wife and I do our own fermenting. I've got a ferment going on over here on the table. I'm trying to learn Japanese fermenting. And so it's a style of learning how, once again, to be in the kitchen and how to make medicine. Ferments are medicine. And this people are missing the point here. It's not a pill to make you feel better. This is medicine that will heal you, but it's a lifelong process. You just don't do it in a week and then go back to your Big Macs.
Well, I think we're almost out of time, Michael. Thank you for joining us today.
Wow, that was great. Sandie, thank you.
I'm sure there's an awful lot more that I've been wanting you to say and can't think of it right now, but another time.
Well, we covered a lot: sex, drugs, rock
drugs,
and roll, and death.
All of it. Michael, thank you so much for adding your 10 best list of spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sandie. My pleasure. So
for more information about Michael Shea's trainings, workshops, videos, audios, and seminars, visit his website at Shea, SHEA, heart.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again to Michael Shea.